Well, the Lake Kariba Ferry tragedy has raised some serious questions about passenger safety, possible negligence, and accountability, with Bulawayo Mayor and Senator David Coltart calling for an independent commission of inquiry to establish exactly what may have caused the disaster. He says the investigation must determine whether the ferry was properly maintained, whether the passenger limit was exceeded, and whether any individuals or authorities were negligent. Pardon me. We speak to him now about the tragedy, the need for accountability, and what must change to prevent a similar disaster. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time and welcome, Senator Coltart.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Excuse me. So, having listened to some of the response there by Zimbabwe's Minister of Local Government and Public Works, Daniel Gawe, you have also been looking at and watching developments, describing like many others around the world, really around the continent, that Kariba tragedy as one that's extremely distressing. Having seen the reports and developments so far, what is your immediate reaction to what has happened?
Well, first of all, I need to say that I'm not speaking in my capacity as mayor. My jurisdiction doesn't extend to Kariba, but I'm speaking as a citizen, but also as a human rights lawyer with 43 years experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this very distressing. My sympathy goes to the families of those who have lost loved ones. And it's a very distressing occasion for all Zimbabweans. I think my concern is that the vast majority of people who've lost their lives and who've suffered as a result of this accident are desperately poor people. They only caught this ferry because they couldn't afford other means of transport. And my worry is that because they're poor, they will not have access to lawyers and others who may obtain justice for them. A secondary concern is that this accident hasn't come out of the blue. At least a year ago, people in Kariba were saying publicly on social media that this ferry and other ferries were in a terrible state of disrepair. And some were saying that this was an accident waiting to happen. And because of this, I believe that this needs an independent inquiry, bearing in mind that this is a ferry owned by government.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, we need people who are not directly connected to government, independent people, to investigate what the causes are and to make recommendations so that the rights of these poor people can be respected.
Yeah.
Because many will have claims against government, those who've lost breadwinners and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And then also to understand the causes of this. Where I agree with Minister Gawe is that it's early days. We don't understand. I can't sit here in Bulawayo and say what happened. None of us really know, but it needs independent people to find out and to report so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you believe that the existing government structures are perhaps not sufficient to investigate this tragedy? And what specifically should this commission that you're calling for be tasked with investigating?
Well, part of my concern stems from the fact that the rule of law generally in Zimbabwe is not respected. There's one law for the ruling elite, and there's another law for the rest of the people. And in this instance, there are interests to protect. And my view is that we'll only get to the truth of this matter and really protect the interests of those who've suffered if we have a completely independent panel made up of experts,
yes,
made up of respected engineers, perhaps lawyers, doctors, who can investigate and come up with a clear understanding of what caused this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And of course there are questions about whether the ferry may have exceeded its passenger limit, because there have been all sorts of numbers that we've been learning of. I mean, some have said there have been 153 people on board, and the number's been up and down. But we did hear from Minister Gawe confirming that indeed it is 119 people who are on board. Not all of them have been accounted for, as the mission is still underway to find the others who may still be missing. If that is, confirmed that the ferry may have exceeded its passenger limit, who should be held responsible for allowing an overloaded vessel to still operate, given that the capacity to hold the additional people may have been a contributing factor to this very tragic incident that you and I speak of this evening?
Well, your question once again illustrates the need for an objective, urgent, independent investigation of this. I've seen these reports as well. I've seen several reports, some from very credible sources, saying that 154 people were on board. I've seen videos of children drowned in the water.
Yes.
And one just doesn't know at this stage. I think the minister referred to the manifest. Presumably the manifest would refer to the people who've paid, but we are just speculating at present. Just today, I think another 2 bodies were found. The minister mentioned 44 people buried today, but I think that the police recovered another 2 bodies, and they still have not managed to right the craft. I saw videos this evening where the craft has been taken to the shoreline, but presumably they don't know what's underneath this vessel yet. And so I think we'll only know once the vessel has been righted what the real death toll is. But we're just speculating now,
Yes.
and that doesn't help matters. We need to get to the crux of this matter. But to turn to the nub of your question, once again, we don't know who is responsible. It appears at this stage as if there were multiple reasons for this, that it was over capacity, that the vehicle, just from the video, the ferry, just from the videos I've seen, did not appear to be well maintained. And then, of course, we had the issue of Tuesday, the weather that you've experienced in South Africa and elsewhere affected Zimbabwe. We've had high winds, and those winds caused quite a high level of waves and the like in Kariba. And it appears to be a combination of all these factors that
Yes.
that has caused this tragic accident.
As you speak about, I mean, just on observation, just looking at the build of the ferry, and a lot of the conversations we've had on the station about, reports about how the ferry was not in a good condition, and that, I mean, you made mention at the start of our conversation here that many have said from at least a year ago that the ferry indicates an accident which may have been waiting to happen. It was only a matter of time, just watching and looking at its condition. And with that in mind, I mean, what safety checks should have been conducted before the ferry was even allowed to operate? Because having listened to Minister Gawe, he said that they won't be suspending services because this is an isolated incident. But then it could point to a bigger problem when it comes to the upkeep of the ferries.
Well, I think that we need to broaden this discussion. Let's move away from water and ferries. If one just drives the roads of Bulawayo, of Zimbabwe, there's very little policing on our open roads. We've had some horrendous traffic accidents in Zimbabwe recently. In our own city, just 2 weeks ago, 4 members of Highlanders Football Club were killed at night because there were cattle on the road and there's very little policing. The point I'm simply making is that right across the country, uh, there is scant observance of basic laws and basic safety requirements. And so we cannot just look at this ferry in isolation. It is widespread. There's a widespread disregard for fundamental laws in the country. And now one can't paint every single ferry, every single boat on Kariba with the same brush.
Yes, of course.
The lake captain and others, those who are qualified, need to urgently conduct an audit of all these boats to make sure that the fundamental rules relating to marine activity on the lake are being respected.
So you've also called for the full force of the law to be used against anyone found to have been negligent. Should we be talking about criminal prosecutions if wrongdoing is indeed established?
Oh, absolutely. If it's found that people acted negligently, if it's found, for example, that senior people within government knew that that this particular ferry was not seaworthy, then that's negligence, which has caused the death of tens of people, and those responsible for that should be held to account. But there's another aspect. Let me come back to the first point I raised as a lawyer. We've seen, well, at present, 46 people have died. Many of those people will be breadwinners in families. And these are poor people who face great difficulty in suing the government for damages, for loss of support and other damages. And that's where we need the full force of law to come in on the side of those who have suffered loss in this way. But once again, we can only get to that point if there is an independent investigation that can also make recommendations about how these people can be adequately compensated and fairly compensated.
Yeah, absolutely. That is indeed the bigger conversation, isn't it? And what immediate support should government provide to the families of those who've lost their lives and to the survivors of the tragedy, especially as you describe the reality on the ground? Because what we do know so far is that government has declared a state of disaster. We've also heard about how they're working with several funeral parlors in Zimbabwe to ensure that people are indeed laid to rest. But what more should the government of Zimbabwe be doing, especially given the description you've given? I mean, poor families who may have lost breadwinners in this instance and who may not have access to justice.
Well, I think it goes beyond the funeral, but let me say I'd commend government for declaring this emergency and for assisting with funerals. That is the right thing to do, and government shouldn't be criticized for that. But it goes way beyond that. I've read reports of single mothers, for example, who are vendors. They had gone to the capital, Harare. They had bought goods, and they were taking those goods on the ferry back to their villages and other places where they lived to sell. They have survived this tragedy, but they lost all their goods. And government should be looking into recompensing those who have lost as a result of what appears to be negligence. Coming back to the point, though, and this is the fundamental point about breadwinners, government needs to, in my view, look at those who've died, to analyze the list, to understand each person who's died, what dependents they had, how old their dependents are, and government now needs to come in and provide ongoing support. In normal civil law, if there's been a death as a result of negligence and a child is left without a father, that child has the right to sue for civil damages for payment of school fees until they become adults, and maintenance from those responsible for the accident causing the death. That is the kind of investigation that government needs to embark on, and create a fund so that all those who've suffered as a result of this accident don't continue suffering for the rest of their lives.
What you paint there is a very heart-wrenching picture, because we are talking beyond just the number of people who have lost their lives, but we're talking the reality on the ground, those who are waking up each morning thinking about a loved one they lost, a loved one who is yet to be found, even as the recovery and perhaps a rescue operation continues. And of course, perhaps very lastly, before we let you go, I mean, what sort of advice would you give as this call that you've made for an inquiry, an independent commission of inquiry to be set up? I mean, what sort of process is going to follow if something like that were to indeed happen here? How is it going to be escalated?
Well, it needs, first of all, to be multidisciplinary. And let me stress, I'm not the only person calling for this. The Institute of Engineers today issued a statement calling for the same thing to be done. It needs to be independent and a multidisciplinary. It needs, obviously, mechanical engineers. It needs people who've got expertise in ships and ferries. It needs lawyers on board. It probably needs social scientists on board to conduct this investigation from many different perspectives. It's not just about the causes of the accident and who's responsible. It also has to investigate the consequences that we've discussed this evening. And then there needs to be a transparent method of conducting the investigation, so that those who've suffered have an opportunity to give evidence freely and fairly, and in a manner that they don't fear, so that we can get to the truth of what has happened. And then there needs to be a mechanism, once that investigation has conducted its investigation, who it reports to make sure that the report is made public. And then government needs to give an undertaking right at the outset that it will respect that report and seek to implement the findings. If that is done, then it might mean that these people don't have to go through the courts, for example, to sue. We might be able to circumvent that and come up with a transparent and fair process to achieve justice for the victims, but also to result in a report that has findings and recommendations to ensure that we don't have a tragedy like this again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. That was Senator David Coltart, who's Bulawayo mayor, but also emphasizing that he speaks as a concerned citizen, a concerned individual when it comes to really a tragic incident, one which we continue to monitor as the information becomes available.